So now that we've got Christmas and New Year out the way, and what a horrendous start to the year I had.
That's it.
I wouldn't wish a coronavirus test on my worst enemy. It is now time to get back down to business though. The last video I posted was me taking a look at the WWF games on the original Game Boy, and to be honest, the games were as horrendous as I imagined them being. Shitty graphics, horrible controls, and gameplay, and just really not that fun to play. Surprisingly, the one I had the most fun with was the very first WWF game that came out on the Game Boy called WWF Superstars. I'll post a link in the description for anyone interested in watching that so you're up to speed with this series so far. The next step, and most obvious thing to do now, would be to look at the WWF games that came out for the Game Boy Color. Will the fact that these games are played in colour make the experience any better? I very much doubt it, but let's take a look at them anyway. Here it is, WWF games for the Game Boy Color. I hope you enjoy. So first up on the list today is WWF Attitude. It was released in June of 1999 for the Game Boy Color, developed by Crawfish Interactive and published by Acclaim Sports. Now I have already covered the console port of this game in the series I've done looking back at the WWF games on the PlayStation 1, so I'll link that in the description for anyone interested in watching. I'm sure most WWF fans are aware of the console version of this game, and probably remember it for bad reasons too. Ridiculous button commands to pull off the simplest of moves, sluggish movements, and horrendously slow speed in which the game is played at. But let's put all that aside. It may share the same name, but the Game Boy version should really be considered a standalone game when given the limitations the handheld had compared to the likes of the PS1 and Nintendo 64. Let's get into it though. Nice menu screen that's easy to navigate with a few options to choose from. These include Challenge, Career Mode, King of the Ring, Versus, Tag Team, and the good old classic Cage Match. Let's check out the Career Mode though. Before starting, you must pick a wrestler to take through the career, and to be honest, this is quite the roster for a game of its time. There are 20 superstars to choose from, with all the top guys included who would have featured on the show back then. Definitely screams Attitude Era for me, so that's a good start. Into a match now, and my god. To be completely honest, visually, it doesn't look that bad. The detail of the wrestlers isn't that great, but everything else looks alright. One thing I must say though, is the Attitude Era for many is considered to be the greatest time period in WWE's history, with jam-packed shows week in and week out. Look at the crowd. You'd never see that many empty seats during this time period in wrestling. Anyways, I got my arse handed to me in the first match I had, but that's a given I suppose. I was too busy trying to familiarise myself with the controls, so at this point I went into training mode after getting beat by Taka. I would highly suggest jumping into training mode for a few minutes, because when I went back and played challenge mode this time round, I had a rough idea how the controls worked, but I say that very loosely. The A button lands a series of punches, while the B button is used for grapple moves. I don't know if the commands to pull off grapple moves have a mind of their own, but I gathered you press B to initiate a tie-up for a grapple move, and from there press A with a directional button. But sometimes it doesn't do anything, resulting in me having to just button mash A along with directional buttons. Much like the PlayStation 1 version of the game, it makes pulling off the slightest of moves very rewarding, knowing at this point you're not just up against a computer, but the actual controls itself. High risk maneuvers can also be pulled off by going up the top ropes and jumping off. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't though. This game does share the same big problem that Warzone had, and that was getting caught in an annoying chain of moves being pulled off by your opponent, especially when your back is turned. It's not like your character automatically turns round when facing backwards, you have to do it manually, which by the time you try and turn round, the computer just spams you with grapple move after grapple move after grapple move until you're in a stunned state again. And yes, it does share the same fighting system as the console port had, with your life bar consisting of colours. Once a colour has drained, your character or opponent will just stand there in a stunned state, open to a whole load of moves to be pulled off on. And also, just like the console port, it just slows down the game massively and drags matches out longer than they need to be. Oh yeah, when you hit the floor, it's roly-poly-oly time again. Although I feel like they addressed this problem because it was much easier to get back up in this, unlike Warzone. To be honest, if for some mad reason you're dying to play a WWF Attitude game, I'd definitely stick with the console version. The Game Boy version isn't necessarily a bad game. I mean, you can pull off moves easier in this, even if the commands are a bit off, but I've played a lot worse games in my time. It's one of those games, if you've played it once, there's really no reason for you to revisit it. It's just a game left in time to remind us of how far we've really come. Next up on the list is WrestleMania 2000. Released in November of 1999, developed by Natsume and published by THQ, who from this point onwards would have a long and healthy relationship with the WWF/WWE, publishing many of their games in the years that followed. Unlike WWF Attitude, where the console game was pretty poor and folk probably weren't expecting much from a Game Boy port, WWF Wrestlemania 2000 on the Game Boy is a port of the game released on the Nintendo 64, which still to this day, along with No Mercy, are considered to be the greatest wrestling games of all time. And for good reasons too. I've had the Game Boy port in my collection for years, and apart from playing it at a friend's house around about 20 years ago, this will be my first proper shot of it. So let's get on with it then. Straight onto a cool menu featuring some of the WWF superstars. This is one thing that amazed me with the Nintendo 64 game along with this version, and that's the logo used for the upcoming WrestleMania pay-per-view. Despite this being released 5 months before the actual pay-per-view, it really shows how far in advance they prepared logos and sets for each event. Anyways, let's see what career mode has to offer. You choose from 16 wrestlers, and they made sure to include all the big and relevant wrestlers for its time. Each wrestler has what the game calls a biorhythm, which shows the wrestler's strengths and weaknesses. Of what? I'm not too sure. Couldn't they have just included agility, speed, etc. with bars corresponding to each of the abilities named? Once you have chosen your wrestler, you're brought to a cutscene. Ooh. They've really stepped their game up here. Throughout the career mode, Vince McMahon will come out and say some catchphrases, and they did their best to get as many in as possible. I can appreciate the attempt of trying to make it as authentic as possible, and to be honest, for a Game Boy game, they've done a good job of it. So, how does it play? I must say, this is by far the best wrestling game I've played on the Game Boy so far while doing these videos. By pressing A, your wrestler will pull off punches, and pressing B will initiate a tie-up, and from here you can pull off a varied amount of grappling moves by pressing B again, along with a directional button. You can also keep the assault going when your opponent is on the map with either a series of kicks by pressing A, or you can either deliver a leg drop or submission move by pressing B depending on where you're standing next to your grounded opponent. Going back to that biorhythm meter I spoke of earlier, the longer the match goes on and the more moves you pull off, this bar will continually move about until the bar at the very end is fully filled, enabling you to pull off a finishing move by pressing B and select together. All in, I genuinely enjoyed my experience with this. The only thing I could say I wasn't a fan of was the character sprites themselves. They really all just look the same, just with a different colour being applied to them. And also, at times it seems like both yourself and the AI are trying to pull off moves at the same time, resulting in literally nothing happening. Just a couple of small issues of mine, but what do you expect from a game like this on the Game Boy? The inclusion of entrances is a nice touch also, with each character coming out with a little quote of theirs being displayed at the bottom of the screen. If you're dying to play a wrestling game on the go for the Game Boy, I'd highly suggest this game. Definitely was surprised with how much fun I had with this, even going as far in the story mode to win the WWF title. Fans of the Game Boy Color and the WWF would have to wait almost 2 years for the next wrestling game on the handheld. If only we knew what was about to come out though. WWF Betrayal was released in August of 2001, developed by WayForward Technologies and published by THQ. If you have ever wondered what WWF mixed with Double Dragon or perhaps Streets of Rage would be like, then this is the game for you. The story in the game is somewhat loosely based on a real storyline that happened a few years earlier during the Attitude Era. Vince McMahon's daughter Stephanie McMahon gets abducted and Vince calls upon the wrestler of your choosing to help get her back. Oh, I'm sure we all know how this is going to end.
It's me, Austin! Oh, son of a bitch! What? It's me, Austin! It was me all along, Austin!
There are only 4 wrestlers to choose from. These include The Rock, Triple H, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and The Undertaker. There are 6 levels in the game, making it a pretty fast experience. In the earlier levels it's pretty easy, as most games are. The earlier enemies you come across don't have any weapons and just kick or punch, but the more you get through the game, they start to introduce harder enemies. These include enemies with stun rods, metal poles, and guns. Yes, guns. I found the game pretty easy until I got to the underground stage where you're on a train. It was like an endurance test with the amount of enemies they threw at you here, especially the guys with guns, because these guys pinpoint the absolute worst thing about this game. They are easy enough to dodge, just wait till they've fired all the rounds from their gun, and when they go to reload, that's your chance to kick their cunts in. But if you get caught up in the crossfire, you may as well die and continue again with full health. If they hit you and put you in a stunned state, it's game over. Once in a stunned state, your character just stands there waving from side to side like a bloody idiot open to all sorts. Especially the guys with guns, because they'll just unload a full clip into your ass and there's absolutely hee-haw you can do about it. Fuck that part. Thankfully though, there is unlimited continues. If it wasn't for that, I doubt I would have finished this game. It was a lot more frustrating than it was actually hard. At the end of every second level, you face a boss in the form of the other 3 wrestlers you had the choice to choose from at the start. Before a boss fight, you'll get a wee cutscene that kind of helps the story progress along a bit. I didn't find these bosses too hard. Triple H gave me a bit of bother though. I wasn't sure if it was down to the fact I was trying to get over Vince McMahon's incredibly predictable bombshell that he was behind it all, or the fact I was maybe thinking too much outside the box trying to run about and dodge his attacks. So after dying a couple of times, I just decided to stand my ground and lay this smackdown on his candy ass with punches and kicks. And it done the job, and I won the WWF title. So after all the dust had settled and all the smoke had cleared, what I don't understand is if Vince McMahon was behind it all along, and he was the one promising a title shot and I won it at the end, then what was even the point in all of this? Surely he's the idiot in the end, wasting all of his time and letting the man that he says he hates win the title. Fuck knows. This is definitely a game I have no intention of ever playing again. I remember playing this game briefly as a youngster, but it had been that long I couldn't remember much, but I certainly don't remember it being this shit. It's not all doom and gloom though. I think the presentation does look good, the enemies look good, and it's easy to learn the patterns for enemies too. I done my playthrough as The Rock, and even though it's a game, I'm sure if most seen him in this they'd know instantly who it's supposed to be, and my god, check that walk out! And you can tell by the way I use my walk, I'm a woman's man, no time to talk. They of course made sure to add all the cliche stages you'd expect to find in a beat 'em up game. An elevator section that just throws enemies at you, and of course a stage towards the end of the game where you have to face all the bosses again one after another just for the sake of it, before finally getting to the last and final boss of the game. And that brings me to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and would like to be kept up to date with future content I upload, then please consider subscribing. Also, if you have played any of these games, then please leave a comment because I'd love to hear other people's opinions on these. Hope to see you in the next one. Bye.